So we're on our series entitled Family Matters. And families do matter. It is one of our core values here at Heartland. And we had to call in the troops at 9:15. We had 9 babies in the nursery at 9:15. And so space is being limited as we speak. Why? Because family matters in Heartland, a church connected. And I've met several new families even on the way in this morning, and we welcome you. We just wanted to let you know that we do have a piece of property on Tompkin Road that God has enabled us to begin to prepare to build a new facility. And in talking with our architect the last few weeks, it's going to be an amazing place where children and students can gather, our families can gather, adults can gather. So continue to pray with us as we dream forward into the future, as we make more room for more families. Marriage this morning is the topic, and the title of my message is What God Has Joined Together. What God has joined together. Now, I am cognizant of the fact that this morning there are those of you who are married. Maybe you're newlyweds. Maybe you've been married for decades. This year we're celebrating my parents' 50th anniversary next month, which is awesome. For others of us, we're still single, or we're asking God to direct us in that right path to that right person. And so today it is also for you. And maybe for some of us who are here, maybe you're separated or divorced. I want you to know that Heartland is a safe place for you as well. That God has something to say to you this morning as well. What God has joined together. There's a reason why I've entitled that. Because marriage is a God idea. Marriage is not an idea from a state or a government. Marriage is not an idea that one day a couple had. Marriage is not even an idea of a religious organization like a church. Marriage is a God idea. God is the one who allowed this opportunity to happen. It happened in Genesis. He created Adam. He created wonderful nature and environment. He created animals, but something was missing. Adam was there, and he was lonely, and he needed a helper. And so it was in that moment that the Lord put Adam in a deep sleep, took a rib off of his side, and with it created Eve. There's symbolization there that this relationship would be this mutual submissive relationship that would journey together side by side in the journey of life. What God has joined together. The reality is that where families go, society follows. If our families and our marriages are fractured and broken, usually there will be huge social ramifications to communities and societies. In fact, well-known, respected sociologist William Grood said this: family is an instrument or agent of the larger society. Its failure to perform adequately means that the goals of the larger society may not be achieved. He's saying that it is so critical that the health of the family unit, as it begins with a husband and a wife, is so critical that it is healthy, because if not, it will have huge negative ramifications to the culture and the society around us. I think he's onto something. This morning I'm going to come at this topic from maybe a different standpoint. I'm going to come at it asking the question, what if God designed marriage not only to make us happy, but to make us holy? What if God designed marriage not only to make us happy, but to make us holy? We all start off in our journey in relationships with this desire of they lived happily ever after, right? And the reality is that every marriage goes through its ups and downs. Every marriage goes through its tough patches. And if we just look at marriage as a place where there will always be bliss and happiness, we're probably setting ourselves up for disappointment. And so the question I'm asking is, what if God designed marriage not only to make us happy, but even more importantly, to make us holy? I believe one of the greatest growth environments to become more like Jesus is in marriage. We learn a lot of things about ourselves, and we learn a lot of things about God in marriage. And so I believe marriage is a great environment to become holy. I believe marriage teaches us a variety of things. And so before I begin on those things that marriage teaches us, here's some biblical text. Here are the words of Jesus out of the Gospel of Mark, chapter 10, 2 to 12, that I want to read to you. These are the words of Christ. Some Pharisees came and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" "What did Moses command you?" Jesus replied. And they said to him, "Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away." "It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you that law," Jesus replied. "But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but they're one. Therefore, what God has joined together," yes, what God has joined together, "let man not separate." When they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this. He answered them, "Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery." Paul, later on in the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians 7, says this, "To the married I give this command, not I, but the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband." Words of Jesus, words of Holy Scripture this morning that are so critical in our lives and in our marriages. And like I said, I believe that God designed marriage not only to make us happy, but to make us holy. What in fact does marriage teach us? I believe that marriage teaches us how to love. I really am a firm believer of that. I have understood and am learning more about what love is because I'm married to this amazing person. It says in the Word, Jesus says, Matthew 22:37 to 39, he says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment." But then he says, "And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus in many ways is saying, the greatest command of it all is that you would love me with everything you've got. And the way that you show your love for me is by loving those around you. In particular, your family, your spouse. When you love your spouse, you're actually showing me how you love me. Because loving me with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength is also signifying that by how you love your spouse, how you love your neighbor, how you love those around you. You see, marriage can be the gym in which our capacity to experience and express God's love is strengthened and further developed. We show our love for God in part by loving our spouses well. When we love our spouses well, we're actually proving and signifying to God that we love him with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. You see, marriage creates a climate where this love is put to the greatest test. When we love well, we please God. On one level, follow me on this, it's easy on some levels to love God. I mean, God doesn't ever smell. God doesn't ever have bad breath. God doesn't reward kindness with evil. God doesn't make berating comments at us at times. Loving God is easy in some sense. But Jesus really let us have it when he attached our love for God with our love for other people. You see, God doesn't command us to get married. He offers it to us as an opportunity. And once we enter the marriage relationship, we cannot love God without loving our spouse as well. May we never believe this ideology that says, I can worship Jesus, love Jesus, and then go home and hate my spouse. It is not what Christ is about. In fact, he says, as you love me, you prove your love for me by how well you love those around you, including your spouse. Our spouse at times might be difficult to love. Nudge your husband or wife at this time. But that's what, in many ways, marriage is for, to teach us how to love. I mean, think of the words in 1 John 4. It says, if anyone says, I love God, yet hates his brother, he's a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And he has given us this command: whoever loves God must also love his brother. There needs to be this connection between our love for God and our love for each other, including our spouses. You see, the beauty of Christianity is in learning to love. And few life situations test that so radically as does marriage. Yes, it is difficult to love your spouse at times, but if you truly want to love God, look right now at that ring on your left hand and commit yourself to exploring anew what that ring represents. A love passionately, crazily, enduringly, the fleshly person who put it there. You see, love is something we grow in our marriage. Marriage teaches us to love. Marriage also teaches us to honor and respect. Marriage teaches us to learn this thing called honor and respect. I mean, the scriptures command us to respect our parents, for example. It commands us to respect those that are older, the elderly, to honor them and respect them. The word teaches us to respect and honor, obviously, God, as it says in Malachi 1. But it also says to honor and respect our spouses, as it says in Ephesians 5 and 1 Peter 3. In fact, the scripture goes even further than that in 1 Peter 2:17 and says, show proper respect to everyone. Now, I know what some of us are thinking. You don't know my spouse. You're telling me I need to respect and honor my spouse. You don't know the character flaws. You don't know the things that have happened. And you're right. I don't know. And I don't want to diminish the pain and the heartache that may have created in your life. But the scriptures do teach us to respect and honor. While many people fight to receive respect, Christian marriage calls us to focus our efforts on giving respect. You see, we're called to honor someone even when we know only too well their deepest character flaws. You see, my wife Sylvia, she knows my deepest character flaws. You see me maybe once a week, sometimes during the week on occasion. You probably see me at my best. She sees me also at my worst. She knows my character flaws. And yet, even amidst those character flaws, God calls myself to honor and respect her amidst her flaws. And God calls Sylvia to honor and respect me amidst my character flaws. Let me illustrate it like this. Mark Twain, he loved the Mississippi River. There's an image of the Mississippi River. In fact, he loved the Mississippi River so much that he really dedicated a whole segment of his life to the Mississippi River. And he would wake up early and he would go explore the Mississippi River. And he just couldn't wait to learn something new about the Mississippi River. He started to know exactly where the bends were, where the unique spots were, because he loved the Mississippi River. But after exploring the river for much time, one day Mark Twain woke up and he had lost his love for the Mississippi River. Why? Because the Mississippi River was now familiar. It was sane. He knew every corner. He knew where things were. He knew how it worked. He lost that creative edge in him to explore the Mississippi River. Familiarity sometimes can breed contempt. Sometimes we start our journey in our marriages and we're all amped up. This is going to be an amazing life together. We get to travel. We get to explore. We get to fulfill each other's dreams. Man, I love this person. And then as we journey together, all of a sudden the character flaws begin to surface. The habits. We get to know each other so well that we start getting lethargic in our respect and honor. Next thing you know, you wake up and you're like, I don't really love this person anymore. It's a vulnerability. That's why we should never stop dating our spouses. We should never stop exploring and learning about each other. We should never stop dreaming together about what the future can look like. We should never stop exploring new things together. Love and respect. As our partners and their weaknesses become more familiar to us, respect often becomes harder to give. You see, men and women, I believe, are equal before God. This truth doesn't mean that they are synonymous or that their roles will be or should be the exact same, but it does mean, as Scripture teaches, that both male and female are made in the image of God. This teaching is found in Genesis 1:27, and it is a teaching also affirmed by Paul in the New Testament when he writes to the Galatians, and he says, there's neither male or female in Christ Jesus. He's saying they're both absolutely valuable to me. They're both equally valuable to me. Why? Because they're both created in the image of God. So the fact that my wife was made in the image of God calls me to a far more noble response than simply refraining from being condescending to her. It calls me to want to be delicate, nurturing, honoring, respectful to the image of God. I want you to think of one of your most prized possessions as it relates to maybe a crystal vase or some porcelain statue, whatever it is that you find very valuable and precious to you. You wouldn't be chucking that thing around the house, would you? You'd probably be delicately putting it in a china cabinet and closing the door. You don't want to break it. Well, in many ways, more than any, porcelain item or crystal vase, God has given us the opportunity to nurture, respect, and honor the apex of his creation, the apple of his eye, humans, our spouses. Because God created them in his image, I need to do whatever I can to honor her, respect her, treat her worthy as one of God's kids. My wife was created by God himself. How dare I dishonor her? Honor isn't one of those things that's passive. It's actually active. When we honor, it's an activity. We honor our wives or our husbands by demonstrating our esteem and respect to them. Maybe it's complimenting them. Complimenting them in public even. Affirming their gifts, affirming their abilities, affirming their accomplishments, declaring our appreciation for all that they do. Honor not expressed is not honor. And so rather than delineating all the weaknesses, why don't we start honoring and respecting by saying, man, the initiative that's in her, the strength that's in her, the character, the perseverance, the talent, the ability. We're created in the image of God, so we all have them. Honor is not passive, it's active. We should desire our spouse to become all that Jesus calls them to become. And we hope with all our hearts that we can be a positive factor in their pursuit of that aim. Many times I think of my wife and I think, God, what can I do to help her reach her full potential in Christ Jesus? Lord, I want to do whatever it takes to be that support, that partner that sees her life just blossom in the eyes of God. When spouses start cheering each other on like that, nothing will stop you. It'll be an amazingly fueled marriage relationship that's exciting. It's when it just becomes about one spouse and their dreams and their vision where things begin to break down. Friend, both male and female are created in the image of God. And so they should be honored and respected. Again, there might be those that say that's going to be tough for me to honor and respect my spouse. You don't know the story. You don't know the pain that they've brought into my life. And you're right, I don't. But I want you to consider the type of people Jesus loved in the days he walked on earth. Let's take a man named Judas who ended up betraying Jesus. Let's take the woman at the well who had several partners, several broken marriages in her life. Let's take Zacchaeus, the conniving financial cheat, and many others like these folks that Jesus interacted with. In spite of the fact that Jesus was without any sin, and these people were very much steeped in sin, Jesus still honored them. Let's take, for instance, Judas. Jesus still washed the feet of Judas. Let's take the woman at the well. In Jesus' day, a Jewish man would never be found talking to a Samaritan woman, yet Jesus spends time with her, talking with her respectfully, and he knew full well how many broken marriages she had been through, and Jesus respects her. Jesus honors her. How about Zacchaeus? He goes over to Zacchaeus' house for dinner. Jesus, the only perfect human being to live on this earth, moved towards sinful people, and he asks us to do the same, beginning with the ones that are closest to us, our spouses. And so I believe that marriage teaches us to honor and respect. I also believe that marriage teaches us to purify. It teaches us to purify. Gary and Betsy Ricucci said this. I love this quote. One of the best wedding gifts God gave you was a full-length mirror called your spouse. Had there been a little card attached to it, it would have said, here's to helping you discover what you're really like. So true. See, the scriptures teach us something. In Ephesians 5:25, it says, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church. He goes on to say that Christ gave himself up for the church that he might make her holy and cleanse her so that the church would be without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish. Basically, God is showing us a picture that as couples, when you come together in holy matrimony, you should be spurring each other on to holiness and godliness and spiritual growth. Loving something and purifying something go hand in hand. You see, a husband who truly loves his wife will want to see her grow in purity. A wife who truly loves her husband will want to see him grow in godliness. Both will put growth in godliness above affluence, about prestige, about public opinion, or personal ease. If God is the center of your marriage, the greatest joy and the greatest determination should be centered around helping each other become closer to Christ, becoming more like Christ. I wonder what happens in our marriages at times when we fail. You see, all of us have been marked by sin. That means we will sin. There will be times where I fail my wife. There will be times where she fails me. Because we're broken people. What happens when you fail? What happens when maybe the sin of greed or envy or jealousy seeps into your heart? Do you hide from your spouse? Or do you utilize the spotlight of marriage to grow in grace? Some of us need this spotlight to understand how truly sinful we are. I mean, think of this statement. Sin never seems quite as shocking when it is known only to us. But when we see how it looks or sounds to another, it feels like it's magnified 10 times over. You know, maybe that's what marriage is also about. It teaches us to be purified. All of a sudden, when I fail, when I have a character flaw, and Jesus convicts me of that, and then it gets exposed in my marriage, it looks even darker. And in that moment, as partners in marriage, we can spur each other on in godliness. We can cover over a multitude of sin in our life. We can exhibit grace and mercy to each other. This manner of viewing marriage points to another important principle. Not just having our sin exposed, but reflecting on how I treat my wife when her sin is exposed. Do I use this knowledge to crush her? When she fails and misses the mark, do I use it as a manipulative tool against her? Do I humiliate her? Do I gain power over her? Or do I use it to actually gently and lovingly lead her into imitating the character of Jesus? See, the marital relationship shouldn't be a grilling experience. And I'm not talking about barbecues. It shouldn't be a grilling experience, but rather a nurturing one, an encouraging one. In fact, Paul says in Thessalonians, therefore encourage one another and build each other up. So in our darkest moments, a healthy marriage will, rather than condemn each other, will lift each other up, will cover each other from harm, will spur each other on to a greater level of godliness because we love each other. See, marriage teaches us to learn to live by extending grace and forgiveness. Unfortunately, many marriages are the opposite. Maybe our spouse has confessed a sin or a weakness in their life, and we've kept every confession in a mental filing cabinet, ready to be taken out and used in our defense or in an attack, in an argument. But true forgiveness is a process, it's not an event. It is rarely the case that we're able to forgive one time and the matter is settled forever. Far more often, we must relinquish our bitterness a dozen times or more, continually choosing to release the offender from our judgment. Unfortunately, many times, I'll hear couples take those filing cabinet files of confessions and weaknesses of their spouse and use them when they want to get their own way. Friends, that's not the Jesus way. How many of us have gone to Christ amidst our failures and says, Jesus, I need your forgiveness. Here I am again, Lord. I need your grace. I need your forgiveness. And he's faithful because he loves you and he lavishes you with grace and mercy. Should we not, in being recipients of God's grace, also be givers of God's grace? In particular to our spouses, rather than judging them, rather than crushing them in their weak moments, picking them up and saying, let's do this together. Let's get through this together. Let's trust in God's grace together. As much as this hurts me, let's cover over a multitude of sin together. See, marriage teaches us to purify each other. And finally, this morning, marriage teaches us to persevere. It teaches us to persevere. You see, some experts suggest that it takes from 9 to 14 years for a couple to truly create and form its being. Yeah, you heard that right. It takes 9 to 14 years for couples to finally feel like they're getting their stride as a couple. Unfortunately, many couples don't allow that time to transpire. We pull the pin on our marriages way too soon. The media tells us and tries to paint this picture that marriage is one big, long, steamy love scene. The reality is it's not. The reality is that feelings, they come and go. The reality is that love is a choice. It's a commitment to a vow that we've made to our loved one. Teaches us to persevere. We live in a nation many times where quitting is part of the deal. Employees quit their jobs as soon as the going gets tough. Employers quit on their employees as soon as profits dip 0.25%. People routinely quit on their church. I don't like something, I'll just move on to the next church. The Bible even teaches us that people quit on their faith. And sometimes I'm afraid we're just too quick to quitting. When instead, Paul says in 2 Thessalonians, may the Lord direct your hearts into God's love and Christ's perseverance. Christ's perseverance. You see, for the spouse who feels like quitting on their marriage, may God direct your heart into God's love and into his perseverance. If we're serious about pursuing spiritual growth through marriage, we must convince ourselves to refrain from asking the spiritually dangerous question, did I marry the right person? You see, once we exchange our vows, little can be gained spiritually from ruminating on that question. A far better alternative to questioning one's choice is to learn how to live with one's choice. If you're hearing this and you've already gone through a divorce, there is no point becoming fixated on something you can't now undo. But look at the life of Jesus, and you will see tremendous mercy. See, I'm a firm believer that there is life after divorce. That God doesn't just discard you and say, that's it, there's nothing good that can come out of your life. No, God is a redeemer. He's a healer. He's a restorer. In fact, I want to conclude with a story as the worship team comes up. It was several years ago. Sylvia and I were newlyweds in BC, where we started our journey together. And Sylvia was working for a banking institution, and there was this gentleman who would come in on a regular basis. And he was an older gentleman. In fact, he was a senior. He was in his 80s, and he was blind. And so I guess Sylvia had built a relationship, a rapport with him, and she would go the extra mile for him to serve him well. And he would come every day to kind of get his $5 to $10. And so they built a friendship, and Peter would always go to Sylvia's wicket to be served. And one day Peter says, you know, Sylvia, I would love to meet you and your husband for coffee. And so we arranged it, and we went out to Tim Hortons, his favorite spot. He didn't come alone. He came with his wife, Mary. And this was the beginning of a great relationship between a newlywed couple in their 20s with an older couple in their 80s. It was like God kind of brought us together. He was blind, and she could barely walk, so she had to kind of slowly with her stroller get through. And they would always jokingly say, she's got my eyes, he's got my legs. Powerful thought, eh? But then they began to share their story with us, and Peter was an orphan. He lived a real tough life growing up, and came to Canada with a few pennies in his pocket, trying to make life work. Meanwhile, Mary got married to a military man early in her life. It was a horrible marriage. He cheated on her over and over again, and was verbally abusive, and they divorced. She was a broken woman, and here's this broken man, and in their 40s, God brought them together. And I remember them saying this statement to us. They said, the first 40 years of our life, please excuse the expression, but they said it was hell. It was horrible. It was full of heartache and pain. But the last 40 years have been amazing. They've been the best years of our lives. And I remember when Mary got ill and she was admitted to the hospital, and I remember Peter giving me a call one day, and I heard it in his voice. He knew he was losing his wife. The best thing that ever happened to him. So I rushed over there, and he was trying to feed her yogurt, and you could tell he was distraught. He's like, she's got to eat or else she's going to die. So he gave me the yogurt, and I'm trying to feed her. She can't keep this down. I just stopped, and I said, let's just pray. We had this beautiful moment of prayer. A few hours later, Mary died. Sylvia and I went to the funeral, and Peter wanted us right beside him the whole time. It was like his best friend had gone to be with the Lord. A few years later, Peter went to be with the Lord. But I always have fond memories of Peter and Mary Hildebrand. They did life together. He was her legs. She was his eyes. They had quirky things. They, again, had no grandchildren, so they had these big signs in their house. Big, ferocious dogs on duty. They had no dogs. He'd put out this food dish, and he had put on killer on it, making people think there was this massive dog on the premises. There was no dog on the premises. They had all these kind of quirky things. But one thing they had was they loved each other. They loved each other, and God redeemed their lives. She was divorced, but God restored her. He was orphaned, but God blessed them with an amazing wife. And today they're in the heavens together. Friend, it's easy to list all the things in our spouses that we don't like. But God calls you to honor. God calls you to respect. Why? Because they're created in the image of God. Friend, maybe God designed marriage not just to make you happy, but to make you holy. To make you more like Him. To learn what perseverance is. To learn what it is to love. To learn what it is to respect and honor. But don't expect your spouse to get it right all the time. Why? Because they're not God. Only in God will you find perfect love.